Hello, welcome to my channel. This is Amber Rain Davis from NotableInk.com. I'm so happy to be participating in Altenew's December 2018 Build a Flower Poppy blog hop. Be sure to check out my blog as there is a giveaway on my blog at NotableInk.com. Let's get started. This is the Build a Flower Poppy Stamp and Die Bundle. The dies always come with the Build a Flower stamp set, so it's a great value. So I'm using some deep red cardstock here, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp both of the flowers. There's a large and a small flower onto the red cardstock in Versamark ink. I'm also going to be stamping this on a craft paper as well. I wasn't 100% sure whether or not which one I would be using, so while I had the stamps out and loaded in my MISTI, I decided I'd go ahead and stamp both cardstocks. So again, I'm doing this in Versamark ink. After I stamp this second set in Versamark, I decided that I would stamp it in black ink as well. So if you saw my previous video, I did another video with this stamp set. I actually have 5 cards for this blog hop, and I added the hand-drawn accents in black ink. So I wasn't sure if the white or the black would look best, and so I'm going to go ahead and do both, and whatever ones I don't use I'll end up adding to a different project. So if you saw my previous card, I did that on yellow cardstock, and the second layer that I added the shadows with the Versamark ink didn't show up as well on the light cardstock, but you can see that it shows up beautifully on the craft cardstock and also on this red cardstock. Because it's a dark cardstock, the tone-on-tone watermark imaging is fabulous. I love it. So this shadow that we're adding here is going to help guide my hand-drawn lines that I'm going to add to these images. All right, so I'm going to start off with a white Sakura Jelly Roll pen. There are 3 different sizes of these Jelly Roll white pens. This one is the 08 version. There's an 05, which is a finer point, and a 10 or 10 that is a thicker line. I find the 10 is usually too thick, and I do like the 05, but I wanted to really be able to see these lines, so I kind of split the difference and went with the 08. If you saw my previous card, you can tell that these lines, I'm keeping them further apart. With this being an 08 pen, it's a thicker line, so it needs more breathing room. Also, keeping the lines further apart is going to help to be able to see that watermark shadow that we have there. So I'm taking my Jelly Roll pen and I'm following the curve of the petals. So I'm using the stamped lines and also the watermarked shadows in order to guide the direction of my lines, the curve of my lines. One thing to note about these Sakura Jelly Roll pens is you're going to get a much better flow of ink if you use hardly any pressure at all. If you are pushing down on the pen, it's actually going to stop the flow of ink. So you want to barely graze the surface of the paper with the pen so lightly, and you're going to get a nice thick vibrant line. If you put any amount of pressure down on the pen to the paper, you're going to get a much more muted line. So that's the trick to these pens. You'll get a really nice flow to the ink that doesn't skip if you use very little pressure. I love how vibrant this is on the red cardstock. I think it's so striking to me. I really enjoyed how these flowers turned out with these hand-drawn strokes. I went ahead and trimmed out the rest of the hand-drawn strokes since you've already seen it a couple times, and we'll move on to putting the card together. So I cut a thick strip of Neenah Solar White 80 pound, and you can see that I stamped my sentiment up above in black ink, but with all of the ink on the flowers being white, I decided it would be better to gold heat emboss the sentiment instead. So I treated the paper with an anti-static powder tool, went ahead and stamped it in Versamark ink, and I'm just putting on the gold embossing powder. The whole time before I started putting the powder on, I'm heating up my heat tool Over on the side, we'll go ahead and melt that embossing powder. If I haven't heated it up for long enough, or what I feel like is long enough, I usually will start by heating the back of the paper first. I have a tendency to overheat my embossing powder, which makes it bubble up, so you want to keep your heat tool moving and go from front to back, and that'll help with warping as well. I got a little smudge on the edge there, so I'm just erasing that smudge. So now I'm going to start putting the card together. I'm backing those panels with some foam tape, and the small 1/4-inch strip that I cut for the center, I have the hardest time cutting straight lines, and you'd think I would be able to do. I have two different trimmers. I have the Tim Holtz Maxi Guillotine trimmer, and then for whatever reason it was just a little bit off. One of the ends was thinner than the other, so I pulled out my Fiskars trimmer to cut this small strip more evenly. So again, I'm just putting some foam tape on the back of that. I'll use my grid mat to get these lined up straight, and I'm kind of just eyeballing the spacing and trying to get it as even as possible. The 3 different strips of craft that's showing through, I'm trying to get even strips of that from top to bottom. So I decided that 3 large flowers was realistically all I could fit on the card. 4 was just too overwhelming. But there were some kind of large gaps in there. So I went ahead and die cut the 3 small elements from the stamp set, and I'm just gonna stamp those in white pigment ink. I felt like it would be easier to die cut them first and then stamp them, rather than try and line up the small die and die cut it afterwards. I didn't mention in the beginning, but the large flowers, I actually white heat emboss those. But you could also just stamp those in white ink as well if you didn't want to heat emboss. The reason I heat embossed is not only to add some texture, but also because I didn't want to wait for the white pigment ink to dry. So once I have these stamped, I decided that the flowers, I wanted to add in red one more time. Once I started arranging these, it was just too flat with that much craft paper. And so I Copic colored the flower in red. Here's a close-up of the card so that you can see the detail of the white jelly roll, of the Versamark shadow, and of the red flower there. And I hope that you enjoyed this card today and that you'll give this technique a try. You really could use this technique on any layering stamp sets that you have. There are so many wonderful layering stamp sets from Altenew. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any of the other cards in this series. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Notable Ink. I have linked some other videos below so that you can check those out as well. Thank you so much for stopping by, and as always, products are listed below in the video description. Have a great day.